don't ever hire someone you can't fire. And here's what I mean by that. I was in the National Guard. There was a gentleman in my Guard unit who was about 15 years older than I. And so I hired him to work for me at this company where I work. And very quickly in his tenure there, I began to observe that he was not a cultural fit for that organization. People were giving me feedback. I would observe him, and I didn't have the courage to fire him. The guy watched me grow up. He was 15 years older than I, and...
Hello. Welcome to another Knowledge Bomb episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Jeff Standridge.
And if this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. And if you're on iTunes, go ahead and rate the podcast and leave a review. That helps get the word out to great leaders and entrepreneurs like yourself.
Please help me welcome Jeff with the culture of excellence.
This is Cedric Francis, and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
It's an honor to be here and to speak with you and your listeners. Grew up in rural Arkansas, a town of about 1,250 people, 28 people in my graduating class, went off to college about 2 hours away, crammed a 4-year degree into 6 years, and spent about 10 years in the healthcare field. I was formerly trained as a paramedic and a respiratory therapist. Spent 9 years on the helicopter team at Arkansas Children's Hospital, 6 of which I was also a professor at the University of Arkansas for medical sciences. But I decided I didn't want to do another clinical degree, so I got a degree in leadership and organizational behavior, and that led me out of healthcare into the business world. Worked internationally for about 20 years with a publicly traded company. And 8 years ago, I spent the first half of my life making a living. I wanted to spend the second half making more of a difference. And I left on my 50th birthday to start an entrepreneurial organization called the Conductor, where we secure third-party sources of funding from the state of Arkansas, the U.S. Small Business Administration, corporate sponsors, and others, so that we can do free coaching, consulting, mentoring, and training for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and small business owners. And as a result of that, ended up starting a company called Innovation Junkie, which is really more of a billable consulting firm that works for companies that are not able to take advantage of those free services. So that's what I do.
Awesome. You began to study leadership. So you studied leadership. So what you thought you knew about leadership that you realized wasn't true to where you are now?
Great question. I didn't really know what the term leadership actually meant. I thought of leadership, and I actually created a course at the university when I was teaching there, but I was in my late 20s, early 30s, right? So I didn't even know what leadership was, and I was creating an academic course on it. And so I was teaching things like supervision and management and those kinds of things. And you know, over the course of the last 20 years, I've developed a definition of leadership that I would say the entire definition is something that I didn't really think of when I was studying leadership and even teaching leadership. And that definition, leadership is the most important requirement for personal and business success. In simple terms, it's defined as the willingness to be held accountable for results and then to deliver on that responsibility no matter what the external circumstances, situations, or pressures. And I used to think that that definition of leadership, because I also have a military background, that leadership was an act of assertion. I have to hold my people accountable, right? I have to hold my people accountable. But leadership in simple terms is defined as the willingness to be held accountable. And so I've come in my older and hopefully my wiser years to realize that leadership's really more an act of submission than it is an act of assertion, the willingness to submit ourselves to being held accountable.
Wow, Jeff, that's good. How did you get to that point?
A lot of failure, a lot of trying to coerce and push and convince people to do things, a lot of asserting myself to hold people accountable when I wasn't being accountable myself. a lot of surrounding myself with people who were just really good leaders. I remember when I first made the step over into the corporate world, I worked for a female leader who was a very senior executive in the company. And I remember hearing her say in a team meeting, probably hadn't been there 2 weeks. And she said, we were talking about some kind of an issue. And she said, yeah, that was a leadership failure on my part. I let you guys down, and I will correct that. That won't happen again. I was blown away. I had never, ever heard or witnessed that degree of both strength and vulnerability present itself in the exact same scenario. And so that really had an impact on me. And I probably have a half a dozen other stories like that where people had an impact on me in both showing me what leadership actually was, but then also putting up a mirror in front of me and letting me see how I was behaving relative to that.
Wow. On a personal note, what is something you can think of right now? Do you have any stories or anything, what you would consider leadership failure or something, a leadership mistake, something you did and said, man, what I know now, if I would have known then, I would have done it differently?
Yeah, so I have a list of what I call the Standridge top 20, and it's the leadership lessons I learned the hard way. I started off with the top 5, and then it became the top 10, and then it was the top dozen, then the top baker's dozen, then it was 15, and then I think I have about 27 or 28 items on it now, so I clicked down. But one of those is don't ever hire someone you can't fire. And here's what I mean by that. I was in the National Guard, joined the Guard when I was 17, spent 20 years in the Guard. So I basically grew up there. There was a gentleman in my Guard unit who was about 15 years older than I. He had a doctorate in education. He was a high school superintendent. He was very technically skilled with like computer technology. And so I hired him to work for me at this company where I worked. And very quickly in his tenure there, I began to observe that he was not a cultural fit for that organization. People were giving me feedback. I would observe him. He was a superintendent, and that's kind of the way he behaved. And he was just working for me as like a team leader, a small, flat organizational hierarchy, no real titles. And so he was a team leader. And I didn't have the courage to fire him. I didn't, the guy watched me grow up. He was 15 years older than I. And, I moved responsibilities around and, much to his dismay and just couldn't make it work. And I didn't have the courage. I didn't have the courage to fire him. And so I ended up taking another job in the company, but in another geography in Europe. And I left him there for someone else to deal with, and they readily dealt with him and released him from the company. And he never spoke to me again. And he was one of my best friends. And he actually passed away without me ever really getting the opportunity or taking the opportunity to try to set things right. And so I have this rule: don't hire someone you can't fire, and have that conversation with them on the front end and say, hey, look, we've known each other for a long time. I think you're the right fit for this job, but you need to understand at work, we're colleagues, at home, we're friends, and we're going to act accordingly. And I messed it up.
And I'm listening to what you said because someone right now listening, like, man, I'm dealing with that right now. What advice would you give to that individual that's dealing with that right now? And they're like, man, I hired somebody that I can't fire. What do I do, Jeff? What do I do?
So I have this framework that I call feedback without fallout, where someone gave me feedback one time that reported to me. She actually worked for me, and she came in and gave me feedback in a manner that completely disarmed me and put a mirror up in front of me with the way I was behaving. And what she did is she asked permission. May I give you some feedback? I said, of course. And she said, I'd like to share with you what I'm observing. I'd like to tell you how it makes me feel and the impact it's having. And then I'd like to give you a chance to respond, and we can try to resolve it. And she said, when I come in for my weekly touch base with you, I begin to talk through where my bottlenecks are, where I need assistance, how my projects are going. I begin to observe a tilting of the head, a glazing over of the eyes, and a frequent checking of the watch. That makes me feel like my job's not important. Makes me feel like I want to look for another job. Makes me feel like I'm not a valued member of the team. The impact it's having is I've applied for several jobs and I have 2 interviews, one tomorrow and one next week. Now I'd like to give you a chance to respond. And so I processed that and I looked at what did she do? She asked for my permission. She owned the agenda. She prepared for the meeting. She knew what she was going to say. She used I messages versus you messages. She didn't say you do this or you do that. She said, I begin to observe. It makes me feel like this. This is the impact it's having. She spoke only for herself and not for anybody else. She didn't say a lot of people think that you mistreat them when you have conversations, you know. And so I would encourage the person to have that conversation using that framework to say, look, you and I are friends. We've been friends for a long time. I'd like to share with you what I'm observing. I'd like to tell you the impact that it's having, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond. You know, I hired you into this job. I'm observing X, Y, and Z. The impact that it's having is it's resulting in lower performance on the organization. It's making you unsuccessful, and it's going to require me to have to move you out of the organization if it doesn't change. Now, I need to talk with you about that and just remove the arrows from their quiver and sit down and have an honest conversation.
Knowledge bomb. Jeff, that was really good. That's really helpful. And I think that's a great start for somebody in a situation like that. Like after that's done, okay, so you're giving them a chance to get it together, whatever. So what's the next step? How long, I guess, for a check up again or whatever? What amount of time would you give before the next time you meet?
Yeah, I would probably respond with an email that say, hey, appreciated the conversation. This is what we talked about. This is what we agreed was going to happen. I'd like to touch base, you know, over the next couple of weeks and make sure things are on track, and then we can go from there. But I would also not get out of that conversation once we decide on what we're going to do. Then I would step back a little more and say, okay, let's talk friend to friend here. Your friendship is worth more to me than or my friendship with your wife or my friendship with your mother or your dad or whomever. Your friendship, your relationship with me is worth more important to me than your job or your role here. So if you don't think this is going to work, it would be much easier on both of us if you decided that and you did something different. If you're confident that you can make this work, then I need you to understand that we're going to have to draw a line in the sand regarding our relationship. I'm going to be upfront with you. I'm going to be honest with you, but I'm also not going to cut you any slack because that would not be fair to you or fair to other people.
Jeff, that's good. Jeff, I want to talk a little bit more about your organization, Innovation Junkie. It's a pretty cool name. I first of all, I'm kind of curious on where did this name come from?
Sure.
And what inspired you to begin this journey and why?
Well, as I said, when I was 50 years old and figured out kind of a few years before that, kind of what my calling was versus what my vocation was and the relationship between the two. I decided that about 8 years after I had that kind of calling vocation exercise that I wanted to retire from my corporate job, and I wanted to start an entrepreneurial support organization called the Conductor. And it's in my hometown, and we actually partnered with an organization up in Northwest Arkansas, up near the headquarters of Walmart and Tyson Foods and what have you. And it was called Startup Junkie. And that was the name of the organization. And so we partnered with them. We created kind of a satellite of Startup Junkie down in Central Arkansas called the Conductor. And that's the sponsored or funded services that we provide for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs in the state of Arkansas. So it's funded specifically to cultivate entrepreneurship in Arkansas.
Wow.
We started having a number of companies coming to us saying, look, we need the same services, but we know we don't qualify for your funded services or your free services. And the companies all over the country, all over the world, quite frankly. And so because we wanted to keep the business model pure of funded services versus billable services, we decided to play on the Startup Junkie name and create a company called Innovation Junkie. And that's focused on billable consulting services in the areas of innovation, strategic growth, executive excellence, and what have you.
So you have this amazing company that you're building. And culture is definitely huge. How do you identify culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I ask that question from my clients a lot, because I share some stats with them that say companies with strong positive cultures have faster revenue growth to the tune of about 400% faster.
Wow.
They're more profitable. They have more engaged employees, less employee turnover, higher customer satisfaction, and lower healthcare costs. And companies with weak or negative cultures have just the opposite of that. Plus, they have more absenteeism, more accidents, and lost time for work, for illness, and what have you. And so I share that with them, and then I say, well, that begs the question: what is culture? And I have people who say, well, it's our core values. And I say, well, yeah, that's one way to articulate the culture you're trying to create, is by a set of core values. But culture is everything about a business. It is the core values. It's whether we live by those core values or not. That's part of the culture. It's the unwritten norms, the unwritten rules, the unwritten patterns of behavior. It's the way we talk to each other, the way we don't talk to each other. It's whether we're process-oriented or not process-oriented. It's the feeling I get on Sunday night when I'm preparing to go to work on Monday morning. And it's the feeling I get at 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon when I'm driving home. All of those point to the culture. Their organizations have this concept. They all have a culture that they want to create, or that they think they have. They call it the espoused culture. This is who we are. But then they have the culture in use. That's the actual culture. And sometimes they're close together, and sometimes they're really, really far apart. And so my experience is organizations that actively cultivate the espoused culture. In other words, they write it down. They hire people according to the culture, the core values, and other parts of the culture. They promote people according to the culture. They fire people according to the culture. If they don't, then it's just flowery words on a banner hanging on a wall somewhere.
Wow.
And so over the course of the last several years, we've observed about 6 elements that make up we've developed a framework we call the culture of excellence. So those 6 elements really start with strong leadership. So not only a strong CEO, but a strong senior leadership team and strong leadership at all levels of the organization who buy into the culture, who try their best to live that culture, who are willing to hire people according to the culture, promote people according to the culture, and fire people according to the culture. And they're also very strong in setting our second element of a culture of excellence: clarity and focus. We know where we're going. We know who we are as a company. We know where we're going, and we know how and when we're going to get there. And they do everything they can to ensure that all levels of the organization not only understand where the organization's going, but they understand how their individual roles actually contribute to the success of that mission. The third element is related to the third and fourth element: engaged and committed teammates. So they say that one of the single greatest costs to American businesses today is employee disengagement. Now, employee turnover is when someone quits and leaves. Employee disengagement is when they quit and stay. And they say that it costs anywhere from 35 to 50,000 or 35 to 50% over and above their fully loaded salary for a disengaged employee. Wow. And so that is employees that are committed to the purpose and direction of the organization, that are committed to the culture of the organization, that are individually competent, that are in clearly defined and accepted roles, and contribute and submit themselves to being held accountable. Wow. The related element to that, the fourth element, is what I call empowering communication. The word empower, Cedric, means to make someone stronger and more confident in dealing with the circumstances they're facing. And so if you empower someone, or if you have empowering communication, you communicate with people in a way that makes them stronger and more confident in dealing with the circumstances they're facing, even if it's a tough conversation. Maybe you have a performance counseling conversation, but then you circle back and you try to close that out with some empowering words to make them stronger and more confident about moving forward. The fifth element is 100% accountability. So that means that I'm responsible for things, but I'm accountable to people. And so accountability is really about trust and relationships. 100% accountability looks like this. Let's say I've committed to deliver a report to you by noon on Thursday. And at 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning, my world gets thrown into chaos because of a client problem. 100% accountability requires me to immediately come to you and say, Cedric, I know I promised this to you by Thursday at noon. Is that a drop dead deadline for you? And you might say, no. I'm good until Monday. I've had some things take me off track, so I'm not even going to look at it till Monday. Problem solved. But you may say, no, it'd be better if I could even get it at 11:30 because I've got a 1 o'clock meeting with my client. And then I have to say, well, then I'm in trouble and I need you to help me prioritize other things because I got to get this to you. Yeah. That's what 100% accountability looks like versus waiting until noon on Thursday and hoping you don't ask me about it, which is what many organizations do. Yeah. 100% accountability really is synonymous with integrity. Integrity is when we do what we say we're going to do, when our deeds match our words. And when our deeds don't match our words, not only do we not have integrity, we're kind of broken. Because the word integrity literally means whole. To disintegrate means to tear apart. And so if we have lost our integrity, that means we're broken. And we don't have 100% accountability. The last one is I patterned the last one after the words of the great management philosopher Mike Tyson, who said that everybody has a plan until I punch them in the mouth. And the last element of a culture of excellence is organizational agility or organizational resilience. It's the ability to bounce back, the ability to be adaptable, the ability to take what's thrown at us and to stay on our feet or to get knocked down and get back up again as an organization and individually within the organization. So those 6 elements really make up what we call the culture of excellence.
Wow, Jeff, knowledge bombs, man. That was a lot of knowledge you just given to us.
Back when I first got into the world of organizational development and leadership and what have you, many times culture was relegated to the HR organization. Many times business leaders in the organization kind of saw it as fluff. And so that's something the HR organization does. And I can tell you that could not be farther from the truth. Culture drives business results. So it is the responsibility of every leader to not only architect the culture that they're trying to create, but to also communicate that culture, live by that culture, talk about that culture frequently, praise people according to that culture, coach and counsel people according to that culture. It really has to be a significant part of that leader's job because it is a tool by which they deliver sustainable business results. When I was a young college professor, we do student evaluations, right? And student evaluations evaluate the professor. And then at the company where I worked, we did associate satisfaction surveys where they evaluated the leader as well. Yeah. And what I found in those is that there are 3 kinds of comments you receive. There are positive and glowing comments, and you might be lucky enough to get a few of those in your career. There's balanced and constructive feedback that's easy for you to consider and take on board and make improvements from. And then there's vile and malicious comments where they do everything but attack your family, and sometimes they attack your family. And our tendency is to overinflate the positive ones and to discount the negative ones. Yeah. And I think the only way to really be authentic in terms of wanting to improve and having a growth and improvement mindset is we have to look equally at all 3 of those, and we have to look at them with an open mind and say, what would cause someone to say that about me? What have I done? What have I not done? And what would cause them to develop that perspective of me? And guess what? Many times when I asked that question, even though I thought it was vile and malicious and probably went a little bit overboard, when I asked myself that question, truly and earnestly asked the question and considered it, I could probably see where I had an interaction or 2 with them where maybe they developed a harsher perspective than what I would have hoped, but I could see how they developed it. Now, there were some times when I couldn't understand it and I had to go research it a little further, but invariably, if you're going to have a growth mindset, you have to be able to confront the brutal facts and ask yourself the tough questions. Sometimes I need help remembering. And so with this lady that came in to coach me, to tell me about how I would check my watch and what have you, what I told her at the end of our conversation was that I was humiliated. I was embarrassed. That's not the perception that I want to create, because it's clearly a bad habit I've developed. I clearly can't promise you that it will never happen again, but here's what I can promise you. I can give you permission to call it to my attention every single time it happens. And by virtue of you doing that with me, then over time, you're going to recondition that bad habit out of me. And I can do the same thing with this person who thinks that I've mistreated him or her, or I've favored a group of people over another group, is say, I can't promise you that that perception's not going to recur, but so that you can help yourself and so that you can help me, here's what I need you to do. I want us to have the relationship that every time I say or do something that makes you feel this way or that, you bring that to my attention and let's have a conversation about it. We're grown-ups. Let's have a conversation.
Man, Jeff, knowledge bomb. Jeff, this is good. This is good. I want to refer back just to the leadership real quick. What are some leadership growth tips, tools, advice that you would give to the Lead to Greatness community to help us reach our greatest potential?
If there is the opportunity for you to ever take a leadership practices inventory of any type, whether it's a free online or one that you pay for, I encourage you to do that to get an honest assessment. I also encourage what I call the verbal 360. So the 360 instrument, is where we get feedback on us and from our people that report to us, people that are peers with us, people that we report to, and those can be expensive. They can be $300, $400, $500, but you could get a colleague of yours. Maybe it's a networking colleague outside the organization. And I suggest what I call a verbal 360. And I do this with a lot of my clients, is where I tell them to give me 10 people that they want me to call, people they report to, people they're colleagues with, people that report to them. And I schedule a 15-minute phone call with them and I ask them really 4 questions. Number 1, what would you say Cedric is really good at? If you could give me 1 or 2 things that he's really good at, what would that be? And then I say, what one thing, if Cedric improved it, would be transformational to his leadership? And I guess it's just 3 questions, because then the third question is, what other feedback would you give me about Cedric that I didn't ask, but perhaps I should have asked? What feedback would you give me? And then I take all that information across usually, those 8 to 10 people, 7 to 10 people, and I collate that into, here are your top 3 strengths, here are your top 3 opportunities for improvement, and here are a couple of other things that you might want to just be aware of, and give that to the leader and work with them to put a plan together. So you can do that on your own. Agree to do it with a colleague. You be the interviewer for his 10 people, and he could be the interviewer for your 10 people, and y'all could get together and share that information.
Wow, Jeff, that was great. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
And thank you because of you in this conversation today, that the Lead to Greatness community will be better. So thank you for that.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir. If someone wants to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
3 ways. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and my name's Jeff Standridge on LinkedIn. They can also get me at my Innovation Junkie email address, which is jeffs@innovationjunkie.com. And they can always get me at jeffstandridge.com, my personal website as well. And I'd love to interact, be honored to interact with any of the Lead to Greatness community out there. One of my favorite statements is, failure's only failure if you quit. Otherwise, it's just feedback, right? So if you think about it, if you're a leader out there, you're struggling to be successful, you're on the bubble, so to speak. You don't know if you're going to make it as a leader. You continue facing setback after setback. It's only failure if you quit. If you treat every single one of those setbacks, or one of those failures, if you will, as an opportunity to receive information about what you're not doing well and where you can improve, and you use that to hone your approach and to fine-tune your direction, and to fine-tune some of your habits and behaviors and leadership processes, I think you will find success in the end, because failure's only failure if you quit.
Knowledge bomb. Thank you, Jeff. On behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, I want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
It has been my pleasure, and I look forward to talking with you again sometime soon.
We want to thank you for joining us today on the Lead to Greatness podcast. So remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace.